Okay, let's go back. We're talking here with Danny Postel and Fereidoun Dadrass, and we're talking about Iran. One of the things that we see going on in Honduras today. We've seen it in Venezuela. We probably saw a little bit of it in China, but I'm not sure about that one. Was where the military has splits. Certainly in Honduras, where there was recently a coup. Certain segments of the military haven't gone along with it. That happened in Venezuela. What's the status of the military? Were there any rank and file revolts? Is it just something I'm hoping is out there and exists?
That's a great question, because if you study the history of revolutions, and today is, after all, the anniversary of the American Revolution, you look at the history of modern revolutions, and you see that almost invariably a pivotal turning point in any revolution that will decide whether it succeeds or not is whether the army is willing to follow the orders to shoot on the crowds. And in 1979 in Iran, the army, at a certain point, the Shah's army decided it would not open fire on the civilians in the streets of Iran. And that was actually the straw that broke the camel's back, and it was all over for the Shah. What you have in Iran today is a complex situation that Comrade Fereidoun began to anatomize there a moment ago, with these splits between the Rafsanjani faction of the regime
within the clerics.
Within the clerical establishment.
Force, yeah.
Within the clerical establishment. One theory about what has gone on since this election is that it's something of a palace coup, that there has been an inside job in which Ahmadinejad, a lot of people focus on the fact that the presidency in Iran is not a particularly powerful institution. That's true to a large extent. But what's missing from that analysis is that in the last 4 years of Ahmadinejad's presidency, the institution of the presidency has actually grown because of Ahmadinejad's relationship with the Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran began as a faction of the military, its own kind of wing of the Iranian military establishment, but has grown into a kind of separate body. Some people call it a state within a state. Some people say it's a huge mafia-style corporation now. They control something like 1/4 or 1/5 of the Iranian economy. And Ahmadinejad is
like
their
China,
man.
where the military owns big chunks.
Very similar. And
Pakistan.
Ahmadinejad is their guy. He has taken over vast swaths of the Iranian political economy and has actually gone out of his way to make sure that Rafsanjani has been dispossessed of his mafia fiefdom. So, I mean, I think Fereidoun would have more to say about that.
Yeah, most recently, especially when Ahmadinejad has come to power, military, Pastar and Sapapas and Revolutionary Guards, the sort of ranking members, they have, from the beginning of revolution, basically, Pastar and we had some groups and some institutions that took over some economic activities, like Bunyad Mustassafin is like a foundation for the poor, sort of. But basically, people who govern and who sort of took advantage of these economic activities were the military people. But they were not as powerful as since Ahmadinejad has come to power. He basically brought some of the military people to around him, and they took over some of the economic activities. Now, in Iran, like many other countries, the neoliberal tendency has happened. Of course, privatization and free market system and all that was happening in Iran too. But the way they privatized was that they were giving the institutions and some of these factories and all that to the people who they had the connection with. And they were actually relatives or they're in connection with political bureaucrats. So this bureaucratization is happening, this privatization is happening, but it's not in the hands of people. People are not getting, or I would say free capitalist, medium-sized capitalists, they're not having anything. But in addition to that, Ahmadinejad, with this kind of populist, I would say, demagogy and that sort of things, he has done some stuff for the poor people. For example, he has given them some subsidies and all that. But he has not tried to really bring the economy to order and try to create jobs or that sort of thing. So there is some misconception among part of the population that he's doing a little bit here and there and might be better for it's better for poor and working people, but that's not the case. And actually we have higher inflation, we have high unemployment. Inflation is roughly about 30%, unemployment is more than 11-12%, and those are some of the factors that
there's a lot of talk about it being him having a populist base. He had the workers, he had a lot of people, but and even some American leftists like James Petrus, who was pretty respected in my mind on Latin America, ended up sort of defending Ahmadinejad's supposed election. And I think Reese Erlich, another progressive, certainly put that story to rest, and you can look those up. But what about the broad-based nature of the protests? Originally, it was kind of the talk was, well, this is North Tehran. These are the more bourgeois elements. I had seen stories a year or two ago in the New York Times about the disenchanted youth with their little computer setups and their music, having all-night parties out in the countryside or outside of town. And so at first there was the thing, well, maybe the protests were just the upper middle class sectors of the population, but clearly it's a broader based thing, and there are certainly a number of very religious folks involved. Can you, either of you, speak to that and the loss of commitment to the existing regime on the part of workers, if there are peasants, if different people in society in Iran?
No, Mike, I'm glad you mentioned this, because one of the most disappointing aspects of these very exciting last 3 weeks, very historic and dramatic 3 weeks in Iran, has been the response, the sometimes convoluted and confused response
of American leftists.
Of leftists in the West, particularly here in the U.S. where we live. Now, not all. I mean, it's been a mixed bag, but you're right. You mentioned
it shifted pretty quick, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned James Petrus. You could also go, it's not just Petrus, although his piece
Monthly
was probably
Review.
the whole Monthly Review website has been full of this stuff. Now, that's mostly the handiwork of one person who runs the Monthly Review website and is particularly demented. But, I mean, even let's take it closer to home.
I'm a social democrat.
Let's take it closer to home, though, Mike. A world leader who many of us, especially many of the people here at the Heartland Cafe, admire very much, Hugo Chavez, president of Venezuela, was the first world leader to congratulate Ahmadinejad on his victory. Now, you could say, well, he didn't know that the election was stolen. Then, a week later, after hundreds of thousands of people are in the streets of Tehran, many of them being shot and injured in these mass democratic protests, what does Hugo Chavez say? He says, these protests in the streets of Iran are all the work of the CIA and U.S. imperialism, and we support Ahmadinejad.
Calm down up here, Danny.
What I'm saying is...
I know you've been waiting to get at Chavez for a while.
Well, actually, it's not just me. There are Iranian leftists who have written an open letter to Hugo Chavez, who's been one of Ahmadinejad's biggest supporters in the world.
Well, they have economic ties, which
and that's fine.
Was fine, but
that's perfectly understandable.
He clearly took a terrible position, and it remains to be seen if he'll come up off it or not.
Let's hope so. But the point is this: the larger issue.
I hope so.
Yeah, we all do. But the larger issue that you're getting at is, how do we make sense of this sort of these mixed signals we're sent? We sometimes are told that Ahmadinejad is a populist, a man of the people. He comes from humble origins, and he has this kind of following of the masses in Iran. Now, you could have argued that in 2005, especially in the runoff election. I mean, the guy barely squeaked through the first round of the election in 2005. Virtually no one knew who he was in Iran. But in the second round, he had the advantage of running against Rafsanjani, who symbolized everything, such an easy target. Rafsanjani was a mafioso, fat cat, capitalist, corrupt to the core, basically a multi-millionaire. Ahmadinejad really does come from humble working class origins and presented himself very aggressively as a man of the people.
I tried to like him for a while.